Baseball is so old that for more than a century, the game has existed in relatively the same form, creating a conduit for connection that transcends generations. From the nostalgic smell of hot dogs to the rich bellowing of a ballpark organ, baseball's sights, sounds, and smells have become synonymous with American culture throughout time. In this series, we look to highlight the equipment that makes up the sport and how they each came to be. From fielding gloves to baseball bats, these tools of the trade often had fascinating evolutions to become the icons that they are now. Today's video is focused on that little ball at the core of it all, the baseball itself. From their homemade origins to their hyper-specific design of today, baseball development has always been at the center of fascination and conspiracy for players and fans alike. While the baseball's functional design has essentially remained the same for a century, the journey to get to this current version was full of twists and turns. From the lemon peel ball to the figure eight design, from rubber and cork cores to fancy Australian yarn. Welcome back to The Bad Baseball Fan. Let's explore the history of the baseball. As we get ready to tear into the baseball itself, I just want to remind you to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Your support goes a long way and is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss anything from The Bad Baseball Fan. Modern Major League Baseballs consist of a cushioned cork core, wrapped in yarn, covered in two figure-eight shaped strips of cowhide leather with 108 stitches of yarn holding it together. They must be between 9 and 9 1/4 inches in circumference and weigh between 5 and 5 1/4 ounces. All of this culminates in a little stitched sphere of perfection. But how did we get to this perfect design? Baseball as a sport, at least in a form that would be relatively recognizable today, dates back to at least the 1830s in America. And from the beginning, the game centered around a small leather ball. For the first several decades of baseball, the balls used were homemade by the pitchers themselves, and were used in games until they quite literally fell apart. Prior to the 1850s, there were no regulations defining what a baseball must be, but more often than not, they ended up utilizing a rubber core, typically acquired from shoe cobblers who melted down old shoes. Cores sometimes also consisted of materials such as nuts, rocks, and even sturgeon eyes. Essentially anything that was available and would get the job done. This core was tightly wound with yarn and often stitched together with leather, with two designs taking prominence, the gusset ball and the lemon peel ball. The lemon peel balls were smaller, darker, and created more bounce than the gusset balls and more regulated balls that would follow, causing high-scoring affairs in early baseball games. The baseball was first regulated in the mid-1850s by teams that were established in New York who convened and codified much of baseball in written documents. Through these meetings and developments came the first standard baseball. Per Jimmy Stamp of the Smithsonian Magazine, the weight was set to be between 5 1/2 and 6 ounces, and the circumference was determined to be between 8 and 11 inches. This rule set still allowed for quite a bit of variation, especially in regard to the inner construction of the ball. The teams or pitchers still made the balls, and often to their advantage. A ball that was wound tighter with a larger rubber core would provide more bounce, while a smaller core and looser winding would provide a less lively baseball. Teams prepped accordingly based on the strength of their opponents. Far from the rigid standards we have today, the baseballs used at the beginning of organized play were a huge part of the gamesmanship between teams. Roughly around the same time as this initial standardization, the first balls made from two saddle-shaped pieces of leather were introduced. This is the modern stitching pattern we have today, and unfortunately, the origins of this version of the ball are still not fully clear to this day. Some sources, such as the Stoughton History website, believe the first modern baseball design was created by a young man named Ellis Drake in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Others, such as the Natick Historical Society, postulate that Colonel William A. Cutler, a resident of Natick, Massachusetts, invented the figure eight design before selling it to H. Harwood & Sons for production in 1858. Either way, sometime during the mid to late 1850s, the modern stitching pattern on the baseball was invented. Baseballs existed in this state for roughly 2 decades, before further regulations were introduced that created more specific guidelines for ball size. The era of pitchers and ball clubs manufacturing their own balls ended in 1876, with the births of both the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs and the A.G. Spalding and Brothers Company. The latter, created by Chicago White Stockings pitcher A.G. Spalding, came to prominence after it formed a partnership with the National League to be the sole producer of Major League Baseballs. Spalding's early baseballs were made with a rubber core and played favorably to pitchers. According to Spalding's official website, they also became the official supplier of the American League before it was the American League, the partnership being struck in 1889 when the junior circuit was a minor league known as the Western League. The American League ball often slightly differed from the National League ball until the 1930s. Per the Smithsonian Magazine, the AL favored a more lively ball, while the NL favored the opposite. Spalding's baseball was consistent, but relatively soft, favoring both pitchers and low-scoring games all the way through the first decade of the 20th century. During the 1910 World Series, Spalding introduced a new core to the ball made from cork. The cork cores created a much livelier baseball, and as a result, offensive production skyrocketed for the first half of the 1910s. Pitchers countered this within a few years by an increase of spitting on and scuffing of the ball. Another jump in production occurred in 1920, and this may have been in part to another small change in the baseball. According to a New York Times article from 1946, Spalding began to use some Australian wool inside the ball. The Australian wool was allegedly stronger, thus allowing for tighter winding and more bounce. Complaints about the newly coined rabbit ball were rampant, but Major League Baseball eventually told those who didn't like it to shut up and deal with it. A few years after the introduction of Australian wool, Milton B. Reach developed the cushioned cork core, consisting of a cork center coated in 2 layers of different types of rubber. Though this new baseball core wouldn't be adopted by Major League Baseball until 1931. These core developments helped make the standard baseball considerably more durable. In 1934, the 2 leagues finally agreed to use a standard baseball for both leagues. This new ball, fashioned in favor of the American League's livelier ball, was first described in a New York Times article from January 6, 1934. Pictured here are clippings from the original article describing the newly agreed upon ball. Feel free to pause and read it from the source. This was the first time that the exact specifications of the baseball were published. Just under a decade later, Spalding ran into serious supply issues thanks to the United States' active participation in World War II. Ball production in 1943 had to find an alternative to rubber, as rubber production was legally mandated to be used for the war effort. Spalding turned to a similar substance called balata. Balata has many of the same properties as rubber, though it lacks the elasticity. Upon introducing the new balata ball to MLB in 1943, offensive numbers immediately plummeted. Spalding made tweaks to the ball throughout the year to help level out offensive production, but there was little they could do to work with the balata. Luckily enough, prior to the 1944 campaign, synthetic rubber was developed, and Spalding had the replacement substance for the core. Offensive production returned to normal levels. Baseballs remained unchanged for several decades following the Second World War, before Spalding was forced to find a new source of leather for the cover. Having produced baseballs with horsehide for nearly a century, a material shortage led to a switch to cowhide in 1974. Then, just a year later, after Spalding attempted to up the per baseball cost for MLB to buy their balls, MLB announced that it would be moving on from Spalding following the 1976 season. After over 100 years of being the exclusive baseball manufacturer for Major League Baseball, Spalding was out, and Rawlings was in. To this day, Rawlings is still the exclusive MLB baseball manufacturer. An offensive production boost occurred once Rawlings took over, but the recipe for the ball remained the same. For all intents and purposes, the ball has remained relatively unchanged since then, at least at its base level. Materials and production have gotten more consistent over the years, but the process of making the ball remains the same. All 108 of those red stitches are still hand-stitched together, and each and every baseball that rolls off of the line is inspected to make sure it meets the mark. Like most things in this incredible sport, the design of the baseball was virtually perfected decades ago. We'll see little tweaks here and little tweaks there. For example, in response to the juiced ball season of 2019, MLB and Rawlings inspected their baseballs to figure out the reason for the spike in power and to make adjustments to compensate. Prior to the 2021 season, both MLB and Rawlings announced slight modifications to the height of the seams, and stats have leveled out. But even these changes are minuscule in nature. The recipe for the baseball was perfected long ago. Thanks for joining me as we explore the development of the baseball. If you're here at the end, leave a comment with your earliest memory of the sport. What's your first clear memory of that white leather ball and its 108 red stitches? If you've enjoyed this video essay, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss anything from the Bad Baseball Fan. If you're considering more ways to help the channel, consider being a member for only $1 a month, or feel free to check out our merch store. Anyways, thanks for being here, and remember, if you like baseball, like this video and subscribe for more.